as servers weaved through the crowd at the Meridian Technologies holiday party. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Seattle sparkled with thousands of tiny lights reflecting off the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere against the backdrop of the city's skyline. Brett's Story stood near the bar, his fingers loosely wrapped around a tumbler of scotch he'd barely touched. His security training had taught him to maintain awareness even in social situations, and tonight was no different. He watched as his wife, Sherry, commanded attention in the center of the room, her burgundy dress catching the light as she laughed at something one of the senior partners had said. "She's quite something, isn't she?" The voice beside him belonged to Jeffrey Lowe, Meridian's newly appointed CFO. Brett turned to find the man standing closer than social norms typically dictated, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with single malt whiskey. 12 years and counting, Brett replied, keeping his tone neutral despite the slight unease crawling up his spine. He'd spent 15 years reading people's body language, and something about Jeffrey's stance set off warning bells. Jeffrey's hand landed on Brett's shoulder, fingers pressing just a fraction too hard to be casual. "Your department's performance has been exceptional this quarter. The board is very pleased with the new security protocols you've implemented." "Just doing my job," Brett said, shrugging modestly while noting how Jeffrey's eyes kept drifting across the room to where Sherry stood. There was something in that gaze that went beyond professional appreciation, something hungry. "We should discuss expanding your team's budget over lunch sometime," Jeffrey continued, finally releasing Brett's shoulder. "The tech landscape is evolving rapidly, and we need to stay ahead of potential threats." Brett nodded, catching another quick glance from Jeffrey toward Sherry. "That would be great. Have your assistant reach out to mine for scheduling." Across the room, Sherry was now engaged in animated conversation with Dana Sanders, Jeffrey's wife. Dana's forced smile. She nodded along to whatever Sherry was saying. Brett had seen that look before, the polite mask of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Brett." Sherry's voice carried across the room as she waved him over. "Come here, darling. Dana and I were just discussing the charity gala next month." As Brett made his way through the crowd, he caught snippets of conversations about year-end bonuses and holiday plans. Martin from accounting was complaining about his mother-in-law's extended stay, while Sarah from HR was showing off photos of her new beach house in Maui. Normal, everyday office party chatter that seemed somehow hollow tonight. "There you are," Sherry said, sliding her arm through his with practiced ease. Her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn on their first date, wafted around them. "Dana was just telling me about this amazing resort in Bali. We should consider it for our anniversary trip." Brett watched as Jeffrey appeared behind his wife, placing a possessive hand on Dana's lower back. Dana's shoulder twitched slightly at the contact, but her smile never wavered. "The private villas are extraordinary," Dana said, her voice carrying the carefully modulated tone of Seattle's elite. "Complete privacy, your own infinity pool, butler service." "Sounds perfect for a romantic getaway," Jeffrey interjected, his eyes meeting Sherry's for a fraction too long. Brett felt Sherry's fingers tighten slightly on his arm. To anyone else, it might have seemed like an affectionate gesture, but Brett knew better. It was the same tension he'd observed whenever she was calculating her next move in a high-stakes negotiation. "We'll have to compare schedules," Brett said smoothly. "The first quarter is always busy with security audits." Sherry laughed, the sound like crystal wind chimes. "Oh, you and your audits. Sometimes I think you're married to your job more than me." The comment drew polite chuckles from the group, but Brett caught the slight edge in her voice. It was the same tone she used in the courtroom when laying groundwork for a crucial point. "Speaking of jobs," Jeffrey said, "Sherry, I heard Caldwell and Ross landed the Maxi Tech merger. Quite a coup." Brett watched as his wife's professional mask slipped seamlessly into place. "We don't discuss ongoing cases, Jeffrey. You know that." But there was a playful lilt to her admonishment that made Brett's security instincts tingle. The conversation drifted to safer topics: the unseasonably warm weather, the new restaurant opening downtown, the latest exhibit at the Seattle Art Museum. But Brett's attention remained sharp, cataloging every subtle interaction, every lingering glance, every slight shift in body language. Later that night, as they rode home in their Tesla Model S, Sherry scrolled through her phone, occasionally humming in satisfaction at what Brett assumed were likes on her latest Instagram post. A perfectly staged photo of them from the party, #blessed. Jeffrey seems to be settling into his role well, she said casually, not looking up from her screen. Brett kept his eyes on the rain-slicked roads. He does. Dana mentioned they're having some issues with their new house renovation. Apparently, the contractor found major structural problems. Sherry's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard. She seemed pretty stressed about it. Brett murmured, filing away this information along with everything else he'd observed that evening. Their home in the Laurelhurst neighborhood was dark when they pulled into the circular driveway. The security lights activated automatically, illuminating the manicured lawns and carefully tended flower beds. Everything in its place, perfectly maintained, just like their public image. As they prepared for bed, Brett watched Sherry's nightly routine through the bathroom mirror, removing makeup, applying expensive creams, checking her work email one last time. She was beautiful, ambitious, and completely in her element in their curated life. "Good party," she said, finally settling into bed beside him. Though the catering wasn't as good as last year, Brett made a non-committal sound, his mind already processing the evening's observations, filing away details that might seem insignificant to others but set off warning bells in his trained mind. "Good night, darling," Sherry murmured, turning off her bedside lamp. In the darkness, Brett lay awake, thinking about Jeffrey's lingering glances, Dana's strained smile, and the subtle shifts in Sherry's behavior that most people would never notice. After 15 years in corporate security, he knew that the biggest threats often came disguised as harmless interactions, and the most dangerous predators wore the friendliest masks. The perfect life they'd built, the house, the careers, the social media presence, suddenly felt like an elaborate stage set. And Brett couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the wings, someone was preparing to change the script. The March rain drummed steadily against the windows of Brett's office on the 14th floor of Meridian Technologies headquarters. Brett wasn't focused on the view. Instead, his attention was fixed on the security footage playing on one of his monitors, showing Jeffrey Lowe entering the building's parking garage at 7:15 a.m., 2 hours earlier than his usual arrival time. A soft knock on his door interrupted his observation. Brett looked up to see Olivia Fields, Jeffrey's executive assistant, standing in the doorway. Her usually impeccable appearance showed subtle signs of distress. A slightly crooked collar, a pin trapped in her hastily twisted hair bun, and fingers that couldn't seem to stop fidgeting with her wedding ring. "Mr. Story, do you have a moment?" Her voice wavered slightly, despite her apparent attempt to maintain composure. Brett minimized the security footage window and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "What's on your mind, Olivia?" She stepped into the office but remained standing, her knuckles white as she gripped the back of the chair. I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid I'll lose my job." The fluorescent lights caught the slight tremor in her hands as she twisted her wedding ring. "It's about Mr. Lowe and your wife." Brett maintained his carefully neutral expression, though he felt his heart rate quicken. Years of security work had taught him the value of creating safe spaces for people to share difficult information. He stood slowly, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "Why don't we take a walk? The coffee shop across the street is usually quiet this time of day." Olivia's relief was palpable as she nodded, following him to the elevator. They rode down in silence, the only sound the gentle hum of the elevator machinery and the distant ping of arriving floors. Pike Street Coffee was indeed quiet, with only a few customers tucked away in corners with laptops and headphones. Brett led Olivia to a secluded booth at the back, positioning himself so he could see both the entrance and her face clearly. "2 Americanos, please," he told the barista, pulling out his corporate card. "And maybe a slice of lemon pound cake?" He glanced at Olivia, who gave a small nod. Once their coffee arrived, Brett waited patiently as Olivia wrapped her hands around the warm mug, seeming to draw strength from its solidity. "I've been Mr. Lowe's assistant for 8 months now," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, everything was normal. Regular meetings, standard calendar management, typical executive assistant duties. She paused, taking a small sip of coffee. But about 3 months ago, things started to change. Brett watched as she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she navigated to her messages. He started asking me to block out chunks of time on his calendar with vague labels like external business development or strategic planning review. She pushed the phone across the table, showing Brett a series of text messages. He would tell me to make excuses if anyone asked about his whereabouts during these times, especially his wife. Brett scanned the messages, noting dates and times with his trained eye. And these meetings, they weren't meetings at all, Olivia continued, her voice catching. At least, not business ones. He started asking me to book hotel rooms, nice ones, like the Four Seasons or the Thompson. But he wanted them reserved under project names, not his actual name. She pulled up another series of messages, showing Brett the booking confirmations. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my business, that maybe they were legitimate confidential meetings. But then, she broke off, taking a shaky breath. "Take your time," Brett said softly, sliding the plate with the pound cake closer to her. "Last week, I was working late, organizing files for the quarterly review. Mr. Lowe had forgotten to log out of his email on the conference room computer." Her fingers twisted her wedding ring again. "I saw an email thread between him and your wife. They were discussing meeting times, using code words they thought were clever, reviewing the Johnson brief, or following up on the Maxwell proposal." Brett kept his face carefully neutral, though his mind was already cataloging this information against his own observations. "Why are you telling me this now, Olivia?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly dabbed at them with a napkin. "Because my own marriage ended last year due to infidelity. My ex-husband, he had an affair with his colleague. Everyone at his office knew. His assistant, his teammates, even the janitor. But nobody told me." She met Brett's eyes directly for the first time. "For months, I was the only one who didn't know, living in this bubble of false security while people whispered behind my back. I swore I would never be part of doing that to someone else." Brett nodded slowly, processing everything she'd shared. "These hotel bookings, do you have records of all of them?" Olivia pulled a small USB drive from her bag. "I copied everything I could, the bookings, the calendar entries, the email threads I saw. I know it might cost me my job, but—" She straightened her shoulders slightly. "Some things are more important than a paycheck." "Thank you, Olivia," Brett said quietly. "I know this wasn't easy for you." She gave him a wan smile. "There's one more thing you should know. Yesterday, Mr. Lowe asked me to start researching properties in the Hawthorne Hills area, specifically looking for homes with privacy features like gated entrances and mature landscaping. He said it was for a potential executive relocation package, but—" She trailed off meaningfully. Brett knew the implication. Hawthorne Hills was one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods, and coincidentally, the same area where Sherry had mentioned wanting to move during their last dinner party. As they walked back to the office, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets glistening in the weak afternoon sun. Before they reached the building's entrance, Brett turned to Olivia. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know that you did the right thing. And your job is safe. I'll make sure of it." Olivia's relief was visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Story. I hope you'll be okay." Brett watched her walk through the lobby and onto the elevator before pulling out his phone. He had some calls to make and security systems to review. The game was changing, and he needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The following Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp. Brett had arrived at the office well before sunrise, using the quiet hours to prepare for what he knew would be a pivotal day. The security upgrade project had been in the works for months, a legitimate initiative to modernize the building's surveillance systems. What the board didn't know was that Brett had accelerated certain aspects of the implementation, particularly those involving the executive floor. Morning, Mr. Story called Marcus Chen, one of his senior security technicians, as he wheeled in a cart of equipment. "Ready to start the executive suite installations?" Brett nodded, reviewing the installation schedule on his tablet. "Let's start with the CFO's office. Mr. Lowe has an off-site meeting until noon." Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. They both knew Jeffrey wasn't actually off-site, but proceeded to unpack the equipment without comment. Brett had chosen Marcus for this particular task because of his attention to detail and, more importantly, his discretion. "Standard package for this one?" Marcus asked, holding up one of the new security cameras. Plus the additional audio monitoring module we discussed, Brett confirmed, watching as Marcus's hands moved efficiently through the installation process. The small recording device, no larger than a thumb drive, would be virtually undetectable once installed behind Jeffrey's desk. They worked in comfortable silence, Brett occasionally checking his phone where a specially designed app showed him Jeffrey's current location, the Thompson Hotel downtown, where he'd been for the last 2 hours. By 11:30, the installation was complete, and Brett had already received the first test signals from the new equipment on his secure laptop. Marcus packed up his gear, leaving no trace of their work except for the official installation notice on Jeffrey's desk. "Good luck, sir," Marcus said quietly as he left, and Brett knew he understood more than he let on. The first recording came through just after 2 p.m. Brett sat in his office, headphones on, listening to the mundane sounds of Jeffrey's business calls and keyboard clicks. It wasn't until 4:37 p.m. that things got interesting. The sound of high heels on hardwood flooring came through clearly, followed by the soft click of a door closing. "We need to be more careful." Sherry's voice was unmistakable, carrying that same authoritative tone she used in court. "Brett's been asking questions about my late nights at the office." Brett's fingers tightened slightly on his desk as Jeffrey's response came through the speaker. "Don't worry," Jeffrey replied, and Brett could hear the smug confidence in his voice. "I've got him focusing on a security upgrade project. Besides, he trusts you completely. Have you thought more about what we discussed?" There was a pause, and Brett could picture his wife's calculating expression, the same one she wore when planning her approach to a difficult case. "Yes, I think I know how to handle it. I'll suggest an open marriage. Make it seem like my idea, like it's something progressive and healthy." Jeffrey's laugh echoed through the recording, making Brett's jaw clench. "And if he agrees, then we don't have to hide anymore. And if he doesn't?" Sherry's voice took on that precise tone she reserved for her closing arguments. "Well, I've already talked to Carmen Woodard about representing me in a divorce. She specializes in high-asset splits." The sound of movement came through the recording, the rustle of expensive fabric, the soft thud of someone sitting on a desk. Brett could picture the scene perfectly. Sherry perched on the edge of Jeffrey's mahogany desk, her tailored skirt riding up just enough to be suggestive while maintaining plausible deniability if anyone walked in. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Jeffrey's voice had dropped lower, taking on a honeyed quality that made Brett's stomach turn. "That's what I love about you. Always 3 steps ahead." "Someone has to be," Sherry replied, a smile evident in her voice. "You're too impulsive sometimes, Jeffrey. Like those flowers you sent to my office last week. I had them sent from the firm's usual vendor, under the client appreciation account. Still risky. Jessica from accounting asked me about them." There was another shuffle of movement, followed by the distinct sound of lips meeting. Brett forced himself to keep listening, even as his free hand clenched into a fist. "What did you tell her?" Jeffrey asked, slightly breathless. "That they were from a grateful client, of course. But we need to be smarter." The click of Sherry's heels indicated she was moving around the office. "No more unscheduled visits to my office. No more lingering touches at company events. And absolutely no more hotel rooms booked through Olivia." Jeffrey's sharp intake of breath was audible. "You don't trust her?" "I don't trust anyone, darling. That's why I'm so good at what I do." A drawer opened and closed. "Speaking of which, did you look at those investment documents I mentioned?" "Yes, very interesting opportunity. The timing of the merger announcement will be perfect for—" "Not here," Sherry cut him off sharply. "Tonight. Our usual place. I've already told Brett I have a late client meeting." Brett checked his watch, 4:52 p.m. He knew Sherry had indeed told him she'd be working late tonight, claiming a difficult negotiation with international clients required her to stay at the office due to time zones. "I should go." Sherry's voice came through again. "I have an actual client call in 5 minutes, and I need to review the briefs." "Dinner at 8?" Jeffrey asked, his voice eager. Make it 8:30. I'll take care of the reservation." Under my usual alias. The click of her heels faded away, followed by the sound of the door closing. Through the recording, Brett could hear Jeffrey humming to himself as he returned to his desk, the sound of a man who thought he had everything under control. Brett removed his headphones and leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing through the implications of everything he'd heard. The recording had given him more than just confirmation of the affair. It had revealed potential securities violations, corporate espionage, and the carefully orchestrated plan to end his marriage on terms that would leave him looking like the unreasonable party. He pulled up his secure email and began composing a message to Marcus, requesting copies of all security footage showing Jeffrey and Sherry's interactions over the past 3 months. Then he opened his contact list, scrolling until he found the name he was looking for, Jocelyn Carney. As he typed out a meeting request to Jocelyn, Brett could hear the usual end-of-day sounds filtering through his office door. The ding of elevators, the shuffle of feet, the murmur of colleagues making dinner plans. Normal sounds that seemed almost surreal now, like background noise in a play where he'd finally discovered he wasn't the protagonist they'd cast him as. His phone buzzed with a text from Sherry. "Working late tonight? Don't wait up. Left lasagna in the fridge. Love you. Red heart." Brett sent back his usual response. "Thanks for letting me know. Stay safe." Knowing it would fit perfectly into the pattern of their communications, another piece of evidence showing what an understanding, unsuspecting husband he was. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reflected off the glass buildings downtown. In Jeffrey's office 14 floors above, the small recording device continued its silent vigil, ready to capture whatever secrets tomorrow might bring. Brett shut down his computer and gathered his things, maintaining his usual routine. To anyone watching, he was just another executive heading home after a productive day. Only he knew that tonight marked the beginning of a carefully orchestrated counter-strategy, one that would require all his skills in security and surveillance to execute perfectly. As he drove home in the growing darkness, Brett allowed himself a small smile. They thought they were being careful, thought they had planned for every contingency. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly what it meant to try to deceive someone who had spent their entire career studying the art of deception itself. The aroma of rosemary and garlic wafted through the house as Brett pulled into the driveway. His Tesla's headlights swept across the garage door, illuminating the carefully maintained flower beds that lined their walkway. Something was different. Lights blazed from the kitchen window, and he could see Sherry's silhouette moving behind the curtains. Brett checked his watch. 6:45 p.m. Sherry hadn't cooked dinner in months, always claiming late meetings or urgent case preparations. He sat in the car for an extra moment, reviewing the recording from Jeffrey's office one last time through his earbuds. "Make it seem like my idea." Sherry's voice echoed in his ears. He took a deep breath, pocketed his phone, and grabbed his briefcase. Time to see just how well his wife had rehearsed her performance. The kitchen was a theatrical set piece of domestic bliss. Sherry stood at the island, wearing the apron her mother had given her 3 Christmases ago, the one that usually hung untouched on the pantry door. Her dark hair was pulled back in a casual ponytail, and she'd changed from her usual power suit into a soft cashmere sweater and yoga pants. "You're home." She looked up from where she was arranging fresh herbs on a platter of roasted chicken. "I thought we could have dinner together tonight. I made your favorite." Brett loosened his tie, noting how she'd already opened a bottle of their special occasion wine. A 2015 Chateau Margaux they'd bought during their anniversary trip to France. 2 crystal glasses sat breathing on the counter. "This is unexpected," he said, moving to kiss her cheek. Their usual greeting, maintained now for appearance's sake. "What's the occasion?" Sherry's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Does a wife need a reason to cook for her husband?" She gestured to the formal dining room, where she'd set their Wedgwood china and lit tapered candles. "I thought we could talk." Brett played along, helping her carry dishes to the table. The scene was perfectly staged, the warm lighting, the elegant table setting, the carefully casual atmosphere designed to put him at ease. He'd seen Sherry prepare for enough courtroom appearances to recognize when she was setting up her audience. "This looks amazing," he said, settling into his chair. "The chicken smells just like that restaurant in Provence." "I found the recipe online," Sherry replied, pouring the wine with practiced grace. "I've been thinking about that trip lately. Remember how free we felt there? How everything seemed possible?" Brett took a careful sip of wine, watching as she settled into her chair. smoothing her napkin across her lap with deliberate movements. Those were good times. They were. Sherry twirled her wine glass, watching the burgundy liquid catch the candlelight. It's made me think about us, about how relationships evolve over time. Here it comes, Brett thought, maintaining his carefully neutral expression as Sherry launched into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. You know, I've been doing a lot of reading lately about modern relationships and how they're changing. She paused, taking a delicate bite of chicken. There's this fascinating movement toward more open, honest approaches to marriage. Brett cut into his chicken, noting how she watched his every movement. Open relationships, you mean? Yes, exactly. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. She'd always been an excellent performer. It's not about betrayal or lack of love. It's about growth, about allowing partnerships to evolve naturally instead of forcing them into traditional boxes. She reached across the table, laying her hand over his. I've been thinking that maybe we've reached a point in our marriage where we could explore something like that. We're both secure, successful people. We don't need to cling to outdated models of monogamy. Brett set down his fork, studying her face in the candlelight. She'd practiced this moment, he realized. Practiced looking vulnerable yet confident, progressive yet sensitive to his potential reactions. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked, though he already knew the answer from the recording. Sherry sat back, launching into what seemed like a prepared presentation. Think about it. We could maintain our strong foundation while allowing each other the freedom to explore connections with others. Many couples find it actually strengthens their primary relationship. It's about honesty, communication, and mutual growth. She was good, Brett had to admit. The way she framed it as a journey of mutual discovery, the careful emphasis on modern thinking and personal growth, all designed to make any opposition seem regressive and insecure. So, what do you think? She asked, studying his face for signs of distress. He could see her bracing for arguments she'd prepared to counter, reading to deploy the careful logic she'd constructed. Brett took a slow sip of wine, letting the tension build. Then he shrugged. Sure, go ahead and explore. The flash of confusion that crossed Sherry's face was priceless. Her carefully scripted scenario hadn't included this possibility. That's it? You're not upset? Why would I be? He speared another piece of chicken. The rosemary is perfect, by the way. Really brings me back to that little bistro in Nice. Sherry's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. But, don't you want to discuss boundaries? Guidelines? This is a major step in our relationship. I trust your judgment, Brett replied mildly. You've clearly given this a lot of thought. And you're right, we're both adults. We should be free to explore whatever connections feel natural. He watched as she struggled to regain control of the conversation. This wasn't how her script was supposed to play out. There should have been resistance, allowing her to deploy her carefully crafted arguments about personal growth and modern love. His easy acceptance had pulled the rug out from under her entire strategy. We should at least talk about how we'll handle things practically, she tried again. Other couples usually set up rules about disclosure, about when and where. Whatever you think is best, Brett interrupted smoothly. I respect your autonomy. And this chicken really is excellent. You should make it more often. The rest of dinner passed in a strange tension, with Sherry making increasingly desperate attempts to draw him into a deeper discussion while Brett maintained his pleasant, unbothered demeanor. He complimented the food, asked about her latest cases, and acted for all the world like she'd simply suggested trying a new restaurant rather than appending their marriage. As they cleared the dishes, Sherry made one final attempt. You're taking this remarkably well, she said, studying his face. I expected more. Questions. Brett loaded the dishwasher, maintaining the same mild expression. You've always known what you wanted, Sherry. It's one of the things I admire about you. He closed the dishwasher and pressed start. I'm going to catch up on some emails in my office. Thanks for dinner. It was really special. He could feel her eyes on him as he headed upstairs, knew she was trying to decrypt his reaction, to understand where her carefully laid plan had gone wrong. In his office, he pulled up the security feed from Jeffrey's office on his laptop, watching as Sherry's name popped up on the CFO's caller ID less than 10 minutes later. Brett smiled to himself as he saved another recording to his growing collection of evidence. Sometimes the best move in chess wasn't to counter your opponent's strategy. It was to simply step aside and let them stumble on their own momentum. The week following Brett's unexpected acceptance of the open marriage proposal unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck, with Sherry growing increasingly agitated as her carefully constructed plan spiraled out of her control. Brett observed it all through the lens of his security cameras and recording devices, watching as the pressure began to crack their perfectly maintained facades. Monday morning started with Sherry pacing on their back porch, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Brett watched through the kitchen window while preparing his coffee, noting how she kept glancing back at the house. He just agreed. No questions, no arguments, nothing, she was saying, her free hand gesturing in frustration. I don't like it, Jeffrey. He's too calm about this. Brett smiled to himself as he stirred cream into his coffee. The house's security system, which he'd upgraded months ago, picked up her conversation clearly through the outdoor sensors. Maybe he's just more progressive than we thought. Jeffrey's voice came through Brett's hidden earpiece. Isn't this what we wanted? Nobody is this understanding, Sherry hissed. You don't know Brett like I do. He analyzes everything. He's planning something. I can feel it. At work, the dynamic had shifted subtly. Jeffrey's usual confident strut through the office had taken on an edge of nervous energy. Brett watched through the security feeds as the CFO checked his phone compulsively, jumped slightly whenever his office door opened, and began taking longer and longer lunches with Sherry. By Wednesday, the cracks were starting to show. Brett sat in his office, monitoring the feed from the small camera he'd installed in the executive parking garage. Jeffrey and Sherry stood between their cars, their body language tense. You're being paranoid, Jeffrey said, reaching for her arm. This is exactly what we planned for. Sherry pulled away, her voice sharp. Am I? Yesterday he asked how my exploring was going, with this little smirk, like he knows something. And this morning, he mentioned that he ran into Carmen Woodard at the courthouse. So what? He can't prove anything. Jeffrey stepped closer, lowering his voice. Besides, we've been careful, haven't we? Brett switched to another feed, this one from Jeffrey's office, where he'd left his laptop open to his email. A new message popped up from his broker. Regarding your inquiry about the maxi-tech positions, the pieces were falling into place perfectly. Brett opened his own email, composing a message to Jocelyn Carney, the ambitious partner at Wakefield and Ross who'd been trying to recruit Sherry for years. He attached several carefully selected audio files and calendar entries. Would love to discuss a sensitive matter over coffee, he wrote, concerning mutual interests and potential opportunities. The response came within minutes. 4 Seasons, private dining room, 1 p.m. Meanwhile, Sherry's attempts to provoke a reaction from Brett continued to escalate. She began casually mentioning late meetings, dropping names of male colleagues into conversation, leaving her phone conspicuously visible with text notifications from Jeffrey popping up. Thursday evening, she cornered him in their kitchen. I'm having dinner with a colleague tonight, she announced, watching his face carefully. From the firm's corporate division. You don't mind, do you? Of course not, Brett replied, not looking up from his tablet where he was reviewing security footage. Have fun. Don't forget we have that dinner party tomorrow night. Her hand slammed down on the counter. That's it? No questions about who I'm meeting? Where we're going? Brett finally looked up, his expression mild. You're an adult, Sherry. I trust your judgment, remember? He could see the frustration building behind her eyes. This wasn't how she'd imagined their open marriage experiment playing out. She'd expected jealousy, demands for information, something she could push against to justify her actions. His complete acceptance left her with no purchase, no way to paint him as the controlling husband she'd planned to portray. At work, Jeffrey's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Convinced that Brett's approval of the open marriage meant he was either oblivious or didn't care, he began taking more risks. The security cameras caught longer, more intimate meetings in his office with Sherry. Their emails became less guarded, their lunch dates more frequent and public. What neither of them knew was that Brett had already met with Jocelyn Carney. In the private dining room of the Four Seasons, he'd laid out his evidence, the recordings, the email trails, the security footage. But more importantly, he presented something else: proof of potential insider trading and violations of attorney-client privilege. If what you're showing me is true, Jocelyn had said, reviewing the recordings, this could destroy both their careers. Attorney-client privilege exists for a reason. If Sherry's been discussing cases with Jeffrey, Brett nodded, sliding another document across the table. And if Jeffrey's been making investment decisions based on information from those discussions, Jocelyn's eyes widened as she reviewed the trading records Brett had obtained. How long have you been gathering this? Long enough, Brett replied. The question is, what's it worth to Wakefield and Ross to have this handled discreetly? The pieces were all in position now. Brett had transformed what Sherry and Jeffrey thought was a simple affair into a complex web of professional misconduct and potential criminal behavior. Their attempts to manipulate him through the open marriage proposal had given him exactly the cover he needed to spring his trap. Friday evening approached, and with it, the dinner party that would bring all the players together. Brett watched as Sherry fussed over the table settings, arranging name cards with careful precision. Jeffrey and Dana's card sat directly across from Brett and Sherry's places, another power play that would soon backfire spectacularly. The stage was set. All that remained was for the actors to play their final scenes, unaware that the script had been completely rewritten behind their backs. The dinner party had been Sherry's idea, a carefully orchestrated display of normalcy meant to cement the new status quo. The guest list included 3 other couples from their social circle, with Jeffrey and Dana Sanders as the featured players in their ongoing drama. Brett watched from the kitchen as Sherry arranged the last of the appetizers on their hand-painted Italian platters. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a deep blue dress that managed to be both elegant and subtly alluring. Every detail had been considered, from the strategic seating arrangement to the selection of wines. The doorbell chimed at exactly 7. Dana Sanders entered first, her smile brittle as she handed over a bottle of champagne. Jeffrey followed, his usual confident swagger somewhat diminished under Brett's steady gaze. "Brett, good to see you," Jeffrey said, extending his hand. His palm was slightly damp. "Beautiful evening for a dinner party." "Indeed it is," Brett replied, noting how Jeffrey's eyes darted to Sherry, who was greeting Dana with air kisses and compliments on her dress. The other guests arrived in quick succession. The Hendersons from Brett's golf club, the Patels from Sherry's yoga studio, and the Michelsons from their neighborhood association. Soon the living room hummed with conversation and the clink of glasses. "Dinner is served," Sherry announced after the appropriate amount of cocktail chatter. She prepared her signature cocoa vin, the same dish she'd made the first time they'd hosted Jeffrey and Dana, Brett recalled. The symmetry was almost poetic. The tension around the dining table was palpable, though only 4 of the 10 people present understood why. Dana's forced smile grew increasingly strained as she watched Jeffrey pass the salt to Sherry, their fingers brushing in a touch that lingered a fraction too long. The other guests remained oblivious, caught up in discussions about private school admissions and the latest restaurant openings. "So, Brett," Jeffrey said, his voice carrying that false heartiness he'd adopted since their new arrangement began. "How's the security upgrade project coming along?" Brett dabbed his lips with his napkin, enjoying the flicker of unease that crossed both Jeffrey and Sherry's faces. "Quite well, actually. We've implemented some fascinating new monitoring systems. The level of detail we can capture now is remarkable." Sherry's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "Darling, I'm sure no one wants to hear about technical security details over dinner." "Oh, I don't know," Brett smiled, noting how Jeffrey's collar suddenly seemed too tight. "I think some people might find it very interesting. For instance, did you know modern systems can track not just video and audio, but also electronic communications, access card usage patterns, even booking records?" Dana's fork clattered against her plate. "How fascinating," she said, her voice hollow. "Jeffrey never mentions anything about the technical side of the business at home." The emphasis on "at home" was subtle but clear. The evening continued its downward spiral, a symphony of subtle jabs and loaded glances. Brett watched it all with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly fascinating experiment. He noticed how Sherry's hand shook slightly as she served the dessert, how Jeffrey kept checking his phone under the table, and how Dana's smile grew more brittle with each passing moment. The The creme brulee is divine. Sherry, Mrs. Henderson gushed, oblivious to the undercurrents. You simply must share the recipe. Family secret, Sherry replied, her practiced social smile firmly in place. Passed down from my grandmother. Actually, it's from that cooking class we took in Paris, Brett corrected mildly. The one right after that legal conference where you met Jeffrey for the first time, wasn't it? The clink of spoons against china faltered for a moment. Sherry's smile froze, and Jeffrey's hand tightened visibly around his water glass. Speaking of Paris, Dana said, her voice carrying a sharp edge, Jeffrey, didn't you say you had a business trip there next month? Funny, your assistant mentioned it was canceled when I called the office today. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. Brett caught the quick glance between Sherry and Jeffrey, saw the moment of panic in their eyes. As the evening wound down, the other guests began making their excuses, perhaps sensing the growing strain in the atmosphere. Soon only Jeffrey and Dana remained, the four of them standing awkwardly in the foyer. We should do this again soon, Jeffrey said, his forced cheerfulness fooling no one. Oh, I think once was enough, Dana replied coldly, already turning toward the door. After they left, Sherry rounded on Brett in their bedroom, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You're bluffing about something. I can tell. What do you know? Brett calmly walked to his home office, aware of Sherry's heels clicking angrily behind him. He retrieved his laptop and opened it, pulling up the folder he'd prepared for this moment. Why don't you have a seat? He suggested, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Don't patronize me, Sherry snapped, but she sat anyway, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. Whatever you think you know. Brett pressed play, and her own voice filled the room. We need to be more careful. Brett's been asking questions about my late nights at the office. The color drained from Sherry's face as the conversation continued, revealing not just the affair but their plans for using insider information for personal gain. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair, knuckles turning white. How did you? You had no right, she sputtered, lawyer's poise deserting her completely. Actually, as head of corporate security, investigating potential insider trading falls exactly under my jurisdiction. Brett closed the laptop with a decisive click. Now, let's discuss how healthy a divorce will be for your career. Sherry stood up so quickly her chair tipped backward. You've been spying on me? On my private conversations? I'll have your license for this. Oh, you'll what? Brett's voice remained calm. Go to the bar association? Explain how you violated attorney-client privilege by sharing confidential information with Jeffrey? Or maybe you'd like to discuss those investment moves he made right before the Maxi-Tech merger announcement. That's not. We never. Sherry's legal training kicked in, and she stopped herself mid-sentence. I want a lawyer present for this conversation. Carmen Woodard, perhaps? Brett suggested. Although I doubt she'll be interested in taking your case once she sees the full scope of evidence. Insider trading tends to make even the most aggressive divorce attorneys nervous. The fight seemed to drain out of Sherry all at once. She sank back into the righted chair, her face ashen. What do you want? Want? Brett leaned back in his chair. I want you to understand exactly how badly you miscalculated. You thought I was the trusting fool who would either accept your open marriage proposal or react badly enough to justify your planned divorce strategy. Instead, you handed me everything I needed to protect myself while exposing your own unethical behavior. Sherry's eyes narrowed, her legal mind visibly working through the implications. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? The security upgrade, the recordings. You knew all along? I'm head of corporate security, Sherry. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't investigate? You and Jeffrey got sloppy. The lunch meetings, the hotel bookings through his assistant, the conveniently timed trades. You left a trail a first-year security analyst could have followed. Brett stood up, his movement deliberate and controlled. I suggest you spend the night thinking very carefully about your next move. Your career, your reputation, your future. They all depend on what you do next. He left her sitting in his office, staring at the closed laptop that contained evidence of her downfall. As he walked down the hallway, he could hear her phone buzzing, probably Jeffrey, wanting to discuss the disaster of a dinner party. But Brett knew Sherry wouldn't answer. She was too smart not to realize that every word she said from now on could be used against her. The game was over, and Brett had played his hand perfectly. Now it was just a matter of watching the pieces fall where they may. The morning after the confrontation dawned gray and cold. Brett had spent the night in his home office, monitoring the cascade of events he'd set in motion with a series of precisely timed emails. At 6 a.m., the first response arrived from Thomas Wheeler, chairman of the board at Meridian Technologies. Emergency board meeting called for 8 a.m. Security team standing by. By 6:30 a.m., Clayton Ross himself had responded to Brett's evidence package. The founding partner's terse reply spoke volumes. Internal review initiated. Sherry Duncan suspended, pending investigation. Meeting with Ethics Committee at 9 a.m. Sherry emerged from their bedroom at 7:15 a.m., dressed in one of her power suits, Armani, charcoal gray, her armor for difficult days in court. She stopped short when she saw Brett in the kitchen, calmly sipping his coffee while reviewing emails on his tablet. "I've called Carmen," she said, her voice hoarse from what had clearly been a sleepless night. "She's meeting me at 8. Brett nodded, not looking up. "I'm sure she'll find the complete evidence package very enlightening. It should be in her inbox by now." Sherry's hand trembled as she reached for her car keys. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't risk your own career by admitting to corporate surveillance." Everything was done through proper channels. As part of an official investigation into potential securities violations, Brett finally met her gaze. The SEC tends to look favorably on internal whistleblowers who follow protocol. The sound of car tires on their driveway interrupted whatever response Sherry had planned. Through the kitchen window, they could see Jeffrey's Tesla pulling up, his face visible through the windshield, tight with panic. "Don't," Brett said as Sherry moved toward the door. "Unless you want to add conspiracy charges to the ethics violations." Jeffrey's insistent knocking echoed through the house. Sherry stood frozen between the kitchen and the foyer, her legal mind visibly wrestling with her instincts. "Mr. Lowe," Brett called out, his voice carrying easily through the door, "I suggest you contact your personal attorney immediately. The board meeting starts in 45 minutes. The knocking stopped. Through the security feed on his tablet, Brett watched Jeffrey practically run back to his car, phone already pressed to his ear. Sherry's own phone buzzed, a text from Carmen Woodard. Brett could see the message preview on the screen. "Meeting canceled. Cannot represent you in this matter. Conflict of..." "It's already happening, isn't it?" Sherry's voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "You've sent everything to everyone." "Not everything," Brett replied, standing to rinse his coffee cup. "Just enough to ensure the right questions get asked by the right people." The next few hours unfolded exactly as Brett had anticipated. Jeffrey was met at Meridian's offices by security personnel who escorted him directly to the boardroom, his access credentials already deactivated. Sherry's arrival at Caldwell and Ross was equally dramatic, her keycard denied at the parking garage, forcing her to wait in the lobby while senior partners gathered in emergency session. By noon, the initial shockwaves had rippled through Seattle's corporate legal community. Brett monitored it all from his office at Meridian, where he'd been asked to present his findings to the board. The evidence was damning. Recorded conversations about confidential cases, emails discussing privileged information, trading records that coincided suspiciously with major legal decisions. "This goes beyond a simple affair," Thomas Wheeler announced to the assembled board members, his face grave as he reviewed the documentation. "We're looking at potential criminal liability here." In the corner of the room, Olivia Field sat taking notes, her position secure thanks to Brett's careful preparation. She'd been officially recognized as a cooperating witness, her earlier warnings about Jeffrey's behavior now documented as part of the initial investigation. Meanwhile, at Caldwell and Ross, Sherry's attempts to get ahead of the story backfired spectacularly. She tried to file for divorce first thing that morning, claiming emotional abuse and invasion of privacy, but Carmen Woodard had withdrawn from the case as soon as she reviewed the full scope of evidence Brett had compiled. "I can't represent you in this matter," Carmen's email had stated bluntly. "The potential criminal implications exceed the scope of a simple divorce proceeding. I recommend you seek counsel specializing in securities law." Dana Sanders hadn't wasted any time either. By 2 o'clock, Brett received word that she'd retained Carrie Bridges, a divorce attorney notorious for her handling of high-profile infidelity cases. Bridges' reputation for aggressive discovery processes and media management had earned her the nickname the Piranha among Seattle's legal elite. Mrs. Sanders is prepared to cooperate fully with any investigation, Bridges' official statement read. She was unaware of any improper business relationships or potential securities violations. The scandal threatened to expose not just the affair, but potentially years of ethical violations that could impact dozens of cases and deals. As the day wore on, both Meridian Technologies and Caldwell and Ross found themselves dealing with increasingly frantic calls from clients concerned about possible breaches of confidentiality. By late afternoon, Sherry's pristine reputation lay in ruins. Her office had been sealed, her files flagged for review, and her clients were already being reassigned to other partners. The managing partners at Caldwell and Ross had moved swiftly to contain the damage, their concern less for Sherry's career than for the firm's reputation. Jeffrey fared no better. The board placed him on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. His company phone was confiscated, his email access terminated, and security escorts were posted to monitor his personal belongings' removal from the office. Brett watched it all unfold from his command center in the security office, each development exactly as he'd predicted. The careful groundwork he'd laid over months, the properly documented investigations, the officially sanctioned surveillance, the meticulously preserved evidence chain, ensured that every action taken was legally unassailable. As the sun set over Elliott Bay, Brett received one final email. It was from Jocelyn Carney at the competing firm of Wakefield and Ross. Interesting developments today. Perhaps we should discuss how to contain this situation, for all parties' benefit. Breakfast tomorrow? Brett smiled as he typed his response. The pieces were falling exactly where he'd placed them, and the real negotiations were about to begin. The private dining room at the Columbia Tower Club offered a panoramic view morning fog, the Space Needle piercing through the mist like a ship's mast through clouds. Brett arrived 15 minutes early, knowing Jocelyn Carney's reputation for punctuality. She didn't disappoint, striding in precisely at 7:30 a.m., impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her handshake was firm, her smile calculated to convey just the right mix of professional interest and personal understanding. "Quite a show yesterday," she said, settling into her chair as the waiter poured coffee. "Though I suspect we only saw Act 1. Brett adjusted his napkin, maintaining the measured calm that had served him so well throughout this ordeal. "That depends entirely on how the remaining players choose to proceed." "Let's discuss those players." Jocelyn opened her leather portfolio, extracting a series of documents. "We've reviewed everything you sent over. The recordings, the trading records, the email trails. Impressive work, by the way. Very thorough. I'm nothing if not detail-oriented." The waiter appeared with their breakfast, steel-cut oatmeal with fresh berries for Jocelyn, eggs Benedict for Brett. They waited until he withdrew before continuing. "Here's what we're proposing," Jocelyn said, sliding a document across the table. "Sherry joins our firm, but in a reduced capacity with strict oversight. She makes a clean break from both you and Jeffrey, signs an NDA about the circumstances, and we handle any potential ethical reviews internally." Brett took a careful bite of his eggs, letting the silence stretch. "And Jeffrey? The board is offering him early retirement with a significantly reduced package, conditional on his immediate resignation and full cooperation with their internal investigation." Jocelyn stirred her oatmeal methodically. "Everyone saves face, no one goes to jail, and the scandal stays contained." "Interesting proposal." Brett dabbed his lips with his napkin. "And what makes you think I'm interested in containment?" Jocelyn's smile sharpened. "Because you're smart. You've positioned this perfectly, not as a vengeful husband, but as a corporate security director who uncovered serious ethical violations. That distinction protects your professional reputation, keeps you above the emotional fray. But if this goes public, if it turns into a media circus..." She left the implication hanging. "Go on. Wakefield and Ross can absorb Sherry's client list without disruption. We have the infrastructure to monitor her activities, ensure compliance with all ethical guidelines. More importantly, we have the political connections to smooth over any regulatory concerns." Brett took a sip of coffee, considering. And Dana Sanders? Mrs. Sanders will receive a very generous divorce settlement, including property in the Hamptons she's had her eye on. Jeffrey's reduced retirement package will be structured to prioritize their separation agreement. The negotiation continued through 2 more coffee refills, each point carefully discussed and documented. Brett had to admire Jocelyn's thoroughness. She'd thought through every angle, every potential complication. One more thing, Brett said as they reviewed the final terms. Olivia Fields remains at Meridian, with a promotion and a clear record. Jocelyn nodded, making a note. Already handled. The board sees her as a whistleblower who followed proper channels. She'll be fine. The deal wasn't about revenge. It was about containment, about finding the cleanest way to excise a tumor while preserving the health of the surrounding tissue. Brett had positioned himself perfectly, transforming a personal betrayal into a professional triumph. I'll have the papers drawn up by this afternoon, Jocelyn said, gathering her materials. Assuming all parties agree, we can have this wrapped up by the end of the week. Brett stood, adjusting his suit jacket. One final point. I'll need a forensic accountant to review all the relevant transactions. Someone discreet, but thorough. I know just the person, Jocelyn replied. Robin Andrews. She's worked with us before on sensitive cases. I'll have her contact you directly. As they shook hands, Jocelyn paused. You know, if you ever decide to leave Meridian, we could use someone with your attention to detail. One career change at a time, Brett smiled. Let's get this situation resolved first. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conference calls and document reviews. By sunset, all parties had received their copies of the agreement. Brett watched through the security feeds as Jeffrey cleaned out his office under supervision, as Sherry was escorted from Caldwell and Ross for the last time, as Dana Sanders' team began cataloging their joint assets. The deal wasn't perfect, but it was clean. Everyone would survive, albeit with wounds that would take time to heal. And Brett's reputation would emerge not just intact, but enhanced, the dedicated security professional who had uncovered and properly reported serious ethical violations. As he reviewed the final paperwork, Brett allowed himself a moment of reflection. The game had played out exactly as he'd planned, each piece moving precisely where he'd intended. Now it was time to close this chapter and begin thinking about what came next. 6 months later, it's autumn routine. The morning fog giving way to crisp, clear days that showcased the city at its best. Brett sat in a window booth at Café Seneca, watching sunlight play across Elliott Bay while waiting for his breakfast companion. Robin Andrews arrived precisely on time, her auburn hair catching the morning light as she navigated between tables. The forensic accountant had become a regular part of Brett's life over the past months, their professional collaboration slowly evolving into something more personal. Sorry if I'm late, she said, settling into the booth. The Morrison audit ran long this morning. You're right on time, Brett replied, pushing a cup of coffee, prepared exactly as she liked it across the table. How's the new case going? Fascinating. Actually, you know, Robin said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, most people would have just gotten angry, maybe caused a scene. But you played it smart. You protected not just yourself, but potentially dozens of clients and shareholders who could have been affected by their actions. Brett smiled, thinking back over the past 6 months. The aftermath of the scandal had played out exactly as planned. Sherry had transitioned to Wakefield and Ross, her role significantly diminished but her career salvaged. Jeffrey had accepted early retirement, moving to a small town in Arizona where he now listed himself as a business consultant on LinkedIn. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people face the consequences of their own choices, Brett observed, just as his phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline caught his eye. Caldwell and Ross announces merger with East Coast firm. Scanning quickly, he noted that Sherry's name was conspicuously absent from the announcement of the combined leadership team. Brett turned off his phone, focusing instead on the woman across from him. We should probably head out if we want to make our dinner reservations. Robin gathered her things, her movements precise and methodical. One of the many things he'd come to appreciate about her. As they walked toward the door, Brett found himself automatically reaching to hold it open for her, a gesture that felt natural rather than practiced. He'd lost a marriage, yes, but he'd gained something more valuable: self-respect, professional advancement, and a chance at genuine happiness. As they walked toward the restaurant, Brett found himself appreciating the honest simplicity of their connection. No games, no hidden agendas, just two people who had found each other through a shared appreciation for integrity and truth. "Penny for your thoughts?" Robin asked as they waited at a crosswalk. "Just thinking about endings and beginnings," Brett replied. "How sometimes they're the same thing." The light changed, and they crossed the street together. Their pace matched naturally. Ahead, the city stretched out with all its possibilities, and Brett realized that sometimes the end of one story was just the beginning of a better one. Behind them, the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, a perfect sunset marking the close of one chapter and the opening of another. Brett had emerged from the chaos not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. As they walked past the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Brett felt a deep sense of contentment. He had navigated the storm with precision and grace, protecting not just himself but everyone who could have been collateral damage in a Messier resolution. The restaurant's warm lights beckoned ahead, promising good food, better company, and the simple pleasure of an evening spent with someone who appreciated the value of honesty. Brett held the door open, and as Robin passed by with a smile, he knew that this quiet, genuine moment was worth more than all the perfectly staged photographs and carefully curated appearances of his previous life. The maitre d' led them to their table, and as they settled in to enjoy their evening, Brett realized that sometimes the best stories don't end with dramatic confrontations or bitter victories, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've handled things right, protected what needed protecting, and found something real in the process. Epilogue. 5 years later. Brett Story's corner office at Wakefield and Ross, where he now served as global head of corporate security and compliance. The irony of working in the same firm that had once offered Sherry sanctuary wasn't lost on him, but 5 years had transformed both the company and his life in ways he could never have predicted. Robin, now Robin Story for the past 3 years, sat across from him, reviewing their latest joint project. Their marriage had grown from that first collaboration during the investigation, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering honesty. Her forensic accounting firm had become the go-to consultancy for sensitive corporate investigations, with Brett's security expertise often complementing her financial acumen. "Did you see this morning's Bar Association announcement?" Robin asked, sliding her tablet across the table. Brett scanned the headline. Former Caldwell and Ross partner Sherry Duncan's reinstatement petition denied for third time. The article detailed how his ex-wife's attempts to rebuild her legal career continued to face obstacles, despite her completion of ethics courses and supervised practice requirements at Wakefield and Ross's Nevada office. "She never quite recovered from the ethics violations," Robin observed, taking back her tablet. "The insider trading implications were too severe." Brett nodded, remembering how the aftermath had unfolded. Sherry's role at Wakefield and Ross had become increasingly marginalized as more clients learned of her past indiscretions. The firm had eventually transferred her to their Las Vegas office, where she handled routine corporate filings under strict supervision. Her once brilliant career had devolved into processing paperwork and managing junior associates, her name permanently tainted in Seattle's legal circles. "I heard from Olivia Fields yesterday," Brett mentioned. "She's being promoted to chief of staff at Meridian." Thomas Wheeler specifically cited her integrity during the Jeffrey Lowe investigation as a factor in her selection. Olivia's career had flourished in the wake of the scandal. Her role in exposing the ethical violations had earned her a reputation for principled leadership, and she'd risen steadily through Meridian's corporate ranks. She'd even written a well-received article for Harvard Business Review about corporate whistleblowing and ethical responsibility. "Speaking of Jeffrey," Robin said, pulling up another news item, "his consulting business in Arizona didn't last long." The article detailed Jeffrey Lowe's latest setback, his third failed business venture since leaving Seattle. After his retirement package had been depleted by Dana's divorce settlement and legal fees, he'd attempted to establish himself as a financial advisor. However, his involvement in the Meridian scandal had made him radioactive to potential clients. He now worked as a part-time bookkeeper for a chain of local hardware stores, his dreams of corporate glory reduced to reconciling retail receipts. Dana Sanders, on the other hand, had thrived. After divorcing Jeffrey, She'd used her settlement to open an art gallery in New York's Chelsea district. Her eye for emerging artists and shrewd business sense had turned it into a respected establishment. She'd recently married a prominent museum curator, and their social media showed a genuine happiness that her marriage to Jeffrey had never achieved. "Remember Carmen Woodard?" Brett asked, reaching for his coffee. "The attorney who wouldn't take Sherry's divorce case? She's just been named managing partner at her firm. Apparently, her decision to withdraw from our case became a case study in ethical decision-making at Seattle University's law school. The ripple effects of the scandal had transformed Seattle's corporate landscape in unexpected ways. Caldwell and Ross's merger had been just the beginning. The exposure of insider trading vulnerabilities had led to widespread reforms in how law firms and corporations handled sensitive information. Brett's systematic approach to uncovering the ethical violations had become a template for internal investigations, earning him regular speaking engagements at security conferences. "Jocelyn Carney called this morning," Robin mentioned, checking her calendar. "The firm's expanding its compliance division again. She wants your input on the security protocols." Brett smiled at the mention of Jocelyn. Her handling of the scandal's aftermath had elevated her own career trajectory. She now headed Wakefield and Ross's West Coast operations, her skillful management of delicate situations making her the firm's go-to person for crisis management. "I ran into Carrie Bridges at the courthouse yesterday," Robin continued. "She mentioned that Dana's Gallery is opening a Seattle branch next spring. Apparently, Jeffrey tried to claim a share of the profits, arguing that the initial investment came from their marriage assets. How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect." The judge dismissed his claim in less than 10 minutes. Between the documented insider trading and the evidence of his infidelity, he has zero credibility in any courtroom. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Jake Chun, Marcus's son who had followed in his father's footsteps, stood in the doorway with a security report. Marcus had retired the previous year, but his legacy lived on in the security protocols he and Brett had developed. "The quarterly compliance review is ready, sir," Jake said, handing over a thick folder. "We've implemented all the new monitoring systems you recommended." Brett thanked him, remembering how Marcus had trained his son in the same meticulous attention to detail that had helped uncover Sherry and Jeffrey's indiscretions. The security team's reputation for thoroughness had only grown stronger over the years. As Jake left, Robin pulled up another email on her tablet. "The SEC just released their annual enforcement report. They've cited our joint investigation protocols as a model for corporate compliance. 3 other firms have already reached out about consulting contracts. Their professional partnership had proven as successful as their personal one." Brett's security expertise combined with Robin's financial forensics had created a powerful methodology for detecting and preventing corporate misconduct. They'd even co-authored a paper for the Journal of Corporate Security on integrating surveillance and financial monitoring. "Almost forgot," Robin said, gathering her materials. "We're still on for dinner with Thomas Wheeler tonight? He wants to discuss expanding our advisory role at Meridian." Brett nodded, checking his own calendar. Meridian Technologies had emerged stronger from the scandal, their swift handling of the ethical violations earning them respect in the business community. Thomas Wheeler had turned the experience into an opportunity to overhaul corporate governance, with Brett and Robin's firm providing ongoing consultation. As they prepared to leave for their dinner meeting, Brett's phone buzzed with a news alert. A small legal notice caught his eye. Sherry had finally sold their old house in Laurelhurst at a significant loss. The real estate listing had carefully omitted any mention of its connection to the corporate scandal that had rocked Seattle's business community. "Ready?" Robin asked, holding his office door open with a smile. Brett turned off his phone and joined his wife, their steps naturally falling into sync as they walked toward the elevator. The skyline stretched out before them, the same view that had witnessed so many crucial moments in their story, but now it held different meanings. The buildings weren't just architectural features anymore. They were monuments to integrity, to consequences, to the power of truth to reshape lives. As they rode down to the parking garage, Brett reflected on how thoroughly the scandal had transformed Seattle's corporate landscape. Sherry and Jeffrey's affair had exposed vulnerabilities in how businesses handled sensitive information, leading to stricter controls and more rigorous oversight. Their attempts to manipulate the system for personal gain had ironically resulted in reforms that made such manipulation much harder for others. The evening traffic moved slowly through downtown, giving Brett time to appreciate how different his life was now. His marriage to Robin was everything his relationship with Sherry hadn't been, built on mutual respect, professional admiration, and absolute honesty. They had even started teaching seminars together on corporate ethics and compliance, their story serving as a powerful example of how integrity ultimately prevails. Pulling into the restaurant parking lot, Brett spotted Thomas Wheeler's car already there. The Meridian chairman had become more than a colleague over the years. He was now a close friend and vocal advocate for the compliance systems Brett and Robin had helped implement. "You know," Robin said as they walked toward the restaurant entrance, "sometimes I think Sherry and Jeffrey did us all a favor. Their mistakes led to better security, stronger ethical guidelines, and brought us together." Brett smiled, holding the door for his wife. "Sometimes the worst choices lead to the best outcomes, for everyone except the people making those choices." Inside, Thomas Wheeler waved them over to a corner table, his face eager to discuss new developments in corporate security. As Brett settled into his chair, he realized that the scandal that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, not just for him, but for an entire business community that had learned valuable lessons about trust, integrity, and the true cost of betrayal. The night spread out beyond the restaurant windows, the city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere in Las Vegas, Sherry was probably reviewing routine corporate filings. In Arizona, Jeffrey was likely reconciling the day's hardware store receipts. And here in Seattle, in the city they tried to deceive, their legacy lived on, not as they'd intended, but as a powerful reminder that character, in the end, determines destiny. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.